Me know where you're coming from in the world. And remember, as always, our mission here at Dr. Peter Osborne and Gluten Free Society is to help save 100 million chronically sick people from the onslaught of medical intervention where, meds are the solution for everything, surgery is the solution for everything. Of course, we want them to be empowered to make diet and lifestyle changes that could offset or prevent the need for those things. So our mission is to try to reach 100 million chronically sick people. We can only do that if you help us. So make sure you know somebody who could benefit from this program. Make sure that you share this with them. Make sure you're liking, and hit the heart button, hit the like button. That helps it share as well. So make sure you're doing your part, and I'll keep getting you solid information week after week. So looks like we've got lots of folks chiming in here. We've got hey, Tracy Elizabeth is back from New Orleans, and Marie from Toronto, and Chris from Fort Worth, Texas, and Stephanie McAllister from, looks like Michigan. I can't pronounce that. Ish Perning. Maybe I messed that up. I don't know. Danville. We got Dorothy from Danville, Illinois. We got Mary Ann from Colorado, and Rachel from Michigan, and Arlandis all the way from Sydney, Australia, way across the pond. Suzanne chiming in from New York. And more of you, Diane from Austin, Texas, Lori from Arizona, Lynn from Australia, a couple Australians tonight. So Australians representing. We got Dexter from Trinidad, we got Sally from New York, Cheryl from North Jersey, Penny from North Dakota. Looks like pretty much most of the country and lots of the world being represented tonight. Again, keep chiming in, let me know where you're from. That's fuel for my fire, so I'll feed your fire, you feed mine, right? Okay. Tonight we're going to be talking a lot about hormone regulation, and I think it's important that you understand this topic because the common thread with bad hormones is doctors will say your hormones are not regulated or your hormones are deficient or you have a hormone issue. And the first step many doctors want to do is they want to prescribe a hormone-based medication. It doesn't matter whether we're talking about thyroid, because thyroid's a type of hormone. Your adrenal glands make hormones. Remember that your brain, your pituitary gland, or your part of your brain produces a number of different regulatory hormones. Sex, we've got sex hormones for men, testosterone, for women predominantly estrogen and progesterone. Then we've got blood sugar regulating hormones like insulin. So we've got this cascade of all these different types of hormones that the body produces. And at the end of the day, ultimately, if we just seek to give this as medication, and that's the solution for anybody with a hormonal imbalance, what ends up happening is, in my opinion, is a disaster. You do not correct a hormone imbalance by using hormones first. We have to ask some fundamental questions before we just start thinking about giving these. And the number one fundamental question is, where do they come from, right? We really look at, how are they being produced? Why are they being produced? What's in charge of helping them be produced? What nutrients are necessary to help produce them? We want to look at the regulatory component of how your hormones are even produced in the first place. Why does the body make more thyroid hormone or adrenal output? Or why do we produce sex steroids, etc.? Now, I want to focus a little bit initially on sex steroids because one of the things that our society has gone after in the last 40 years or so is cholesterol. We've been told that cholesterol is this evil substance. Cholesterol is this thing that causes heart disease. It's this thing that causes plaquing in your arteries, leading to heart attack, increased risk for stroke, etc. So we've kind of demonized this very, very important molecule. And understand that cholesterol is truly the mother hormone. It's oftentimes referred to as the mother hormone. And if we block it, what we actually end up doing is we end up affecting hormones that are downstream from it. What are those hormones? Well, downstream from cholesterol, if we look at what cholesterol is very, very important in its proper production, what it helps us to produce, one of the hormones it helps us make is progesterone. And then subsequently, that progesterone, downstream from it, testosterone is produced. And then subsequently downstream from that, estrogen is produced. And then estrogen is further metabolized into different forms of estrogen, etc. So if we understand, if we block this, if we inhibit cholesterol, we're in effect inhibiting the main ingredient necessary to be able to produce the sex steroids. Now I want to draw a correlation for you, and some of you might say correlation is not causation, Dr. Osborne. I get it. But we've been attacking cholesterol for about 40 years. We've been lowering it aggressively. Most people, if we look at cholesterol numbers, normal used to be 250, then a panel came out and said 220, then another panel came out and said anything over 200 is considered high. Where do we end? Because the panels that create the cholesterol numbers are actually, many of the doctors on those panels are being paid directly by Merck and Pfizer, the two pharmaceutical companies who have the most to gain as a result of the cholesterol values being low, because these companies make billions of dollars on the selling of cholesterol blocking medications. So how is it that we can allow their scientists who are being paid by them to be able to set what is high and what is low, and how come that number keeps going lower? So we have to ask, why is it as low as it is, and why is blocking cholesterol a good idea when it blocks the production of sex steroids? Remember, we've been doing this almost 40 years in mainstream medicine, and the outcome has largely been a blooming or a blossoming of the steroid industry, meaning that if you look around, as a result of this, men being on high cholesterol or lowering medication have had their testosterone, their capacity to generate testosterone is now being somewhat reduced. And so now what do we see everywhere? We see this new term popping up, low T. They're trying to, I use the word diseaseify, they're trying to diseaseify the fact that, again, in my opinion, that one drug creates a deficiency of a hormone, and now we're diseaseifying what the drug is causing. And that's not really a disease, that's an inhibition of the body's natural process to try to produce a hormone. So we're seeing lots and lots of more men being put on low testosterone, or being put on testosterone pellets, being given testosterone injections, being given testosterone medications. And the same thing for women. We're seeing a lot of women being placed on progesterone. We're seeing a lot of estrogen, bioidentical included, bioidentical estrogens, as well as over here thyroid hormone, among other things. So a lot of people are being placed on these medications as a result of an aggressive policy of going after the very structure, the very substance that's necessary and designed to help us produce it. So the first question is, if you've been diagnosed or if you've got a hormone imbalance of your sex steroids, the first question is, are you artificially lowering your cholesterol? And if you are, you really want to go back and have a talk with that doc about how aggressive he's being with your cholesterol, and talk to him about how this can happen, because you want to have an open conversation with that doctor so that you can make some intelligent decisions, right? So if you're on a cholesterol blocking medication and it's creating a hormonal imbalance in your sex steroids, you really want to go back to that doc and have that conversation. Again, very, very important. Now, aside from this, when we look at, okay, we need cholesterol to do this, understand what else we need cholesterol to do. And I'm going to harp on cholesterol here for a minute. Cholesterol is very important to produce bile acids. And so if you've got gallbladder or liver problem, you need bile acids to absorb fat. It's also, bile acids are a natural detoxifier. You need cholesterol to produce neural synapses. A lot of people don't realize this. This discovery happened, almost probably 20 years ago, but it won a Nobel Prize in that you need cholesterol to form a nerve junction. So nerves communicate to nerves because you have cholesterol. So again, without cholesterol, nerves don't form synapses between each other and they can't communicate. So cholesterol is vital for neuronal synapses. You need cholesterol to produce vitamin D. There's a form of cholesterol in your skin called 7-dehydroxyvitamin or dehydroxycholesterol that forms vitamin D when UV light hits it. And you need cholesterol to form something called CoQ10. And CoQ10 is a rate-limiting nutrient. It's very similar to a B vitamin, but it's a rate-limiting step for all of your body's ability to produce energy. So again, if we block this, we don't just block these, but we block these. And the reason I bring this up is because if you're blocking these affects your hormones as well in other ways. So now we're just adding a new layer of complexity to the scenario. For example, blocking the formation of neuronal synapses is going to influence the way that your brain can generate hormones that regulate other hormones like TSH and FSH and luteinizing hormone. These are master regulatory hormones produced by your pituitary gland that are stimulatory toward your other hormones. So before I get too geeked out on this and get too nerdy and get you guys all confused and lost, I'm going to back up for just a minute. I just want to say that if you inhibit neuronal synapses, you inhibit your brain's ability to help you regulate hormones. Let's keep it at that level so we don't have to dive too terribly deep into this. Now, vitamin D is a regulatory hormone. It's not really a vitamin. It was given that name originally, but vitamin D is actually a pre-hormone. And some of its effects, vitamin D affects your thyroid. Vitamin D affects how you produce insulin. And so again, it goes back to it's a regulatory hormone. So if you're blocking your vitamin D or you're lowering your vitamin D, it's going to have an impact on your thyroid. It's going to have an impact on your insulin. And that can lead to blood sugar disruption and a number of other problems. Now let's add one more caveat. If your insulin level is disrupted and it's too high, let's say you're making too much insulin, which many of us do because we eat too many carbohydrates or too much glucose, and that puts a burden on our insulin. Well, if your insulin levels are too high, a couple of things are going to happen. Number one, insulin being high will cause an estrogen dominance-like effect. So insulin being too high is going to affect your estrogen. Insulin being too high is going to affect your testosterone and your progesterone. So we don't want high levels of blood sugar. Again, therefore, it makes it very, very important, going back to this cholesterol molecule, because without cholesterol, it all kind of just falls apart. And so if you're going to a doctor and they're aggressively telling you they want your cholesterol, I actually heard a cardiologist say one time that he wanted a person's cholesterol at 0. Now, understand that first of all, that's irresponsible and dangerous. Second of all, cholesterol below 150 contributes to depression and suicide. And many people with cholesterol below that level start to become depressed. And then again, if we're following the same line of medical thought, which is when you're depressed, you take an antidepressant, now we're adding in another hormone manipulator. We're adding something in that either affects serotonin or affects dopamine or some of the other neurotransmitters. So again, we don't want cholesterol, total cholesterol is what I'm referring to. We don't want it anywhere near below 150. And a lot of times cardiologists are super aggressive with this, and they're really, really pushing to get it below 150. But research studies show that that creates depression and suicide, and part of the reason why is you're blocking neuronal synapse formation. And when you do that, you're going to get depressed because your nerves are not going to be able to communicate. So you're going to have depressed neurological function. So again, very, very important that you understand where cholesterol sits in this, because again, many of you may be on a statin medication or on some type of drug that is serving to block total cholesterol. Now, beyond these things, let's talk about some other very, very important impact factors here. These are diet and lifestyle things that you want to take into consideration, because they can definitely impact your overall hormone layers, if you will. And especially women, some of the things that help to destroy or to disrupt, we'll call it hormone disruption, your estrogen, your progesterone, predominantly your estrogen, are exposure to pesticides, drinking or eating out of plastics. If you remember all the scare with the BPA, the bisphenol A, it's in plastics, and it's a hormone disruptor. That's one of the things it contributes to increased risk of cancer, and that's why everybody's making plastic now that's BPA free. Understand that there are other BPs. There are other phenyl groups in plastic beyond BPA that are still dangerous. So don't just go buy BPA free plastic. Drink out of stainless steel or drink out of glass and avoid the plastics. But cosmetics contain pseudoestrogens. So we got pesticides, plastics, and cosmetics that all are artificial sources of estrogen that can create an estrogen dominance scenario, which can increase your risk for heart disease and certain types of cancers. So that's one way we can get imbalance. And of course, this is an easy fix, right? We can avoid pesticides by buying organic. We can avoid plastics by not eating off of them or out of them or drinking out of them. And certainly with cosmetics, you can buy more health-conscious cosmetics that don't contain a number of the same chemicals. Now, a lot of people, and there's some famous doctors that made a great name for themselves by writing books on hormone resetting. And one of the pieces of advice that they give is to cut out dairy and to cut out meat. Well, let's dissect a little bit why that advice is being given. If you cut out meat, and you cut out dairy, what you're actually cutting out are some of the hormones that are used in these products. So these hormones, again, if you cut these two things out, well, you won't be getting those hormones that will lead to that estrogen dominance type of scenario. So again, I don't wholly agree with cutting out meat unless you have a genetic factor that where vegetarianism serves you better, and some of you do and some of you don't. And if you don't, it's not a good idea. But what I do recommend is not buying the big feedlot beef where the cows are being penned and they're being fed genetically modified grain loaded with pesticides. Not healthy for the animals. So we can alter that by buying grass-fed beef and free-range organic types of meats where that's not happening, where there's more responsible farming and better care taken of the animals so that we don't actually end up with the metabolic waste products of the excess hormones and the excess pesticides that's going to come in those industrialized versions of those products. So you can buy better versions. You'll pay more for it, but it's worth doing, because if it creates a lack of problems here with your overall hormones, that's going to be a better scenario for you. Now, I want to talk about some of the other things involved within this pathway as well, because to get from cholesterol to progesterone, that requires certain nutrients, and this is very, very rarely talked about, but one of the nutrients necessary to get from cholesterol to progesterone is vitamin B5. You absolutely need vitamin C to be able to do that. You need magnesium to be able to do that. And so again, the reason I'm pointing these things out is because a lot of doctors will say, here's progesterone, but they won't measure B5, vitamin C, or magnesium or other nutrients that are necessary for you to convert cholesterol into progesterone. And to me, this is the most logical first step, is to look at gut function. If you're malabsorbing or maldigesting, or you've got IBS or other gut problems where you're not getting these nutrients in your diet, or if you eat a highly processed food diet where you're not getting enough of these things, then that can lead to disruption. So this is easy. This is an easy factor. This is a diet change, right? We can do diet and lifestyle very, very simply without having to go to heavy-hitting medication. Again, the whole premise, the whole point is that your body knows how to work. If you take away the things that are interfering or that are not allowing it to do its job, then you can get your body to do what it's supposed to do. So again, these nutrients play a major role. And as far as testosterone formation, one of the big ones that's oftentimes not discussed in men is zinc. You cannot make testosterone without zinc. It's a near impossibility. So zinc deficiency is very, very common in men, and there are several reasons why. One, many men who are taking testosterone medications are also on blood pressure medications, and I want you to understand that a lot of your blood pressure medications actually block zinc. They actually cause zinc deficiency. So you know what a scenario that is very, very common is man eating a highly processed diet, going to work 8 hours, sitting at a desk, not exercising, the blood pressure goes up, the doctor puts him on blood pressure medication, that causes a zinc deficiency over time, lowers testosterone because you can't make testosterone without zinc, and now he's being put on a testosterone medication as well without ever having the zinc levels checked, without ever having a conversation about diet, lifestyle, without having a conversation about the importance of exercise. So all that's important. Now with estrogen metabolism, one of the main nutrients you need for estrogen metabolism, you need magnesium, but you also need the methylators, the B12, you need the folate, you need the B6. All these are very, very important nutrients to help your body properly metabolize estrogen. Remember, when we say estrogen, estrogen is not one hormone. It's a family of hormones. There's E1, which is estrone, there's estradiol, there's estriol, and then you have different versions even downstream of those. And so some of those increase the risk for cancer, and some of them are a healthier form of metabolite, but all of them require these nutrients along that pathway for metabolic processing. These things here, again, the plastics, the pesticides, the cosmetics, interfere with the way that your body can metabolize that estrogen. So again, this is an easy change. You know, get these things out of your diet, get these things out of your lifestyle. There's a reason why we see record numbers of hormone abnormalities today. It's in a large part it's because we have so many new chemicals that we're being exposed to. I think it was the FDA, the commissioner of the FDA, this was years ago, said that the number of chemicals being introduced to humans far outweighs our ability to scientifically study them for safety. And I think and that was almost 20 years ago. And I think at that point it was close to 30,000 different chemicals. And so again, the more you can protect yourself, the more you can minimize your exposure to these types of chemicals, the better off you're going to be at reducing your risk of developing some type of hormonal imbalance. Now, there are a few other things that are very, very important for hormonal balance before I start taking your questions. And by the way, those of you who have questions, go ahead and start typing them in for me now. I'll do my best to get as many questions answered as I can before we end the show tonight. But one of the other things that can largely affect your ability to metabolize and properly regulate is exercise. One of the things that exercise, I'll say lack of exercise, causes an increase in this protein called SHBG. Now, the reason I bring this up is because this is a practical tip. This is something that when you're going to your doctor and maybe they're recommending different hormones, maybe they're recommending different medications, you can ask them to measure this. SHBG stands for sex hormone binding globulin. So it's a type of protein that's produced that binds to testosterone and estrogen, okay? And when it's binding them, it makes it harder for these to interact with your tissues, so they're not as effective. So you can have normal levels of estrogen, but if you have high levels of sex hormone binding globulin, then the estrogen that you have is not actually getting access to talk to your cells. And so this can create a hormone deficiency state, even if your hormone levels are normal. So a lot of times doctors may measure your hormones, but they won't measure this to see if it's problematic. Well, one of the things that affects this, again, is a lack of exercise. This is something that very, very simply can be done, is just begin some type of physical fitness program or protocol if you have elevations in this particular substance to help start renormalizing those hormone levels. So having this measured can be very, very helpful. Again, if you're on these medications, just talk to your doctor about measuring your sex hormone binding globulin. Now, one of the other things that we're finding dramatically, and the science on this is getting bigger and stronger and bigger and stronger as each year goes by, and it's the microbiome. It's the bacteria that live inside of us, right? These bacteria can influence our hormones. Certain types of bacteria, there's a compound that we make, or that our bacteria can produce, called beta-glucuronidase. And this can be measured as well. If you've never had this measured, it's just another marker that can be measured. But beta-glucuronidase, when you have a low level of beta-glucuronidase, it's going to affect your estrogen metabolism. And one of the things that's important for this, one of the types of bacteria that has been shown to help with this is lactobacillus. So lactobacillus there are multiple strains of lactobacillus, but if you've been on antibiotics, for example, if you drink chlorinated water where you're not filtering the water, and you've created a microbiome disturbance, if you're gluten sensitive and you don't even know it, understand that gluten disrupts this. This is one of the reasons why gluten can be a hormone disruptor as well, is that it affects the microbiome's ability to produce beta-glucuronidase, and that in turn leads to hormone abnormalities. So your gut microbiome matters. So if you've done things to disrupt your gut microbiome over the years, again, the biggest thing is long-standing antibiotic use or frequent antibiotic use. It's probably one of the worst things that you can do to your gut long-standing. But of course, there are other medications that can disrupt gut function as well. A number of them actually, particularly there are certain blood pressure medications that we know can cause villous atrophy. Some of the blood pressure medications that can actually mimic celiac disease, the sartan class of drugs. So if you're on a blood pressure medication that ends in sartan, that may be something you want to talk to your doctor about switching, because that one's a major gut disruptor. Non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, ibuprofen, naproxen, all can disrupt gut function, leading to problems here. And that, again, think about how many of these different aspects or elements that you're doing on a regular basis that could create a disruption in your body's ability to regulate its own hormones, and think about what you can do and how you can start changing that. So that's a basic lesson for today. I'm going to go ahead and take your questions. We got tons of them flying in here. Yeah, if you're talking about cosmetics, several of you are asking about cosmetics. I really recommend, I mentioned this website last week called EWG.org, Environmental Working Group, and they classify different. Now, we do have on our website, Alan, if we could put that up on the screen, if if you go to our shop and then go to our lifestyle section, there are some different companies there that we recommend for natural lotions, creams, and other kind of hygiene-based products where you're getting a minimal exposure or no exposure to heavy, harsh chemicals. Okay, we got a question coming in. Had a full hysterectomy last week. The doctor has already given me estrogen patches. The side effects from them are horrible, and I'm wondering, should I stop taking or just see how the body reacts? Well, I can't answer that question. I can't give actual direct medical advice here, but I would definitely have a conversation with that doctor. You might even seek out, if that doctor's unwilling, you might seek out a doctor who's willing to look at, instead of giving you a synthetic horse-derived estrogen, you might ask him about bioidentical forms of estrogen, because many women that have had a full hysterectomy don't do well on the horse-derived steroids. They do much, much better on bioidentical forms of estrogen. So it's definitely a conversation I would have with them, especially if you're reacting that poorly to the synthetics. And I would say that on that note, any of you who are facing a hysterectomy, very, very important before you pull the trigger, because once you do a full hysterectomy, it's over. You can't get your ovaries back, right? So before you were to pull a trigger on that, you really want to think about this, because for a lot of women that I have seen come to see me for nutritional guidance over the years, a lot of times just making diet and lifestyle changes regulates it out, and they don't need the surgery. So again, before, never look at surgery as your first option. Never look at just synthetic hormones as your first and surgery as your second option. You understand how powerful this message is today, because if you apply it, there's a strong likelihood that you'll find a great improvement in your outcome. So keep that in mind. Oh, okay. Jennifer's saying, what does spotting after menopause mean? Have had a lot of it after being on paleo AIP for several months. So there's something called, it's a great question. There's something, well, I call it this. I don't know what other people call it, but this is what I call it. And that I call it, oh, that's a terrible color. Let's get a darker one. Pseudo-menopause, meaning that a lot of women think they go through menopause when they don't. And part of the reason they think they're going through menopause is because time leads to such a disruption of this hormonal cascade that they're experiencing hot flashes. They're experiencing what they think is menopause, when actually, in actuality, what they're experiencing is estrogen dominance, not menopause at all. So they have hot flashes, they have trouble sleeping, they have increased anxiety, they have water retention, they have fat gain. Like, all that can happen as a result of that estrogen dominance. Now, when you change your diet and your lifestyle, so if you go like to a no grain, no pain type of diet, those of you who haven't read No Grain, No Pain, make sure you go get your copy, because that diet is a big part of what I'm talking about. But what will actually happen is you start spotting again, and I've actually seen some women regain their period, like they started having their cycle again for several years. They weren't in menopause, they were in pseudomenopause, because their behavior and their lifestyle was leading to hormone disruption that created an estrogen dominance that led to a fake, if you will, or a pseudo type menopause. So it's very possible that you're changing your diet for a few months is leading to a natural re-regulation of your hormones, and that's what you're experiencing. And again, you may, and we can't predict the future, but I've seen many women regain their cycle after changing their diet for several months. So that's not out of the question. That can happen. What's my opinion on bioidentical hormone therapy versus synthetic hormones? Always start, if you need hormone therapy, this is a conversation you definitely want to have with the prescribing doctor, but if you need hormone therapy, my opinion on it is I would always opt for a bioidentical over a non-bioidentical. And here's one of the reasons why. A lot of research shows, and actually Daphne Rowe, who's a researcher on drug-induced nutritional deficiencies, this is where this comes from. This is a doctor who has been studying the effect on medications and nutrients, vitamins. Understand that estrogen, we're talking about estrogen, prescription estrogen, causing a deficiency of magnesium, vitamin B6, zinc, vitamin B2 for starters. So again, if taking estrogen, prescription-based estrogen, can cause disruption in these nutrients, then what happens when these nutrients are disrupted? Magnesium is responsible for more than 300 chemical reactions in the body, so blocking it or disrupting it is a very bad idea. And if you don't know that, then you don't know to monitor it. Your doctor doesn't know that. Your doctor won't know to monitor it. So you want to definitely understand this so that it can be monitored, because if you're going to be on any, whether it's bioidentical or whether it's synthetic, you should understand that estrogen does that when taking it in physiological doses that isn't being produced by your body. So I'd say my opinion is bioidentical over synthetic, because they will work better for your body, in your body. But again, it's also been my experience that some people do better on synthetic than they do on bioidentical. So everybody's going to be different here. I would say before you even entertain either one, is understand this well and apply diet and lifestyle, because you may not need either one. So hopefully that's helpful for you. Amber says, on what day of antibiotics should you start your broad spectrum probiotic? If you were going to start a broad spectrum probiotic, the one I recommend is Ultrabiotic Defense, especially if you've been on an antibiotic or on an antibiotic, because of the dosing. You want mega dosing, you don't want small dosing. So hundreds of billions of colony-forming units of Bifido and Lactobacillus is more ideal if you're on an antibiotic. And you start it right away. You start it while you're on the antibiotic. Don't wait. You just don't want to take them concomitantly. So like you wouldn't take your antibiotic and then take your probiotic. You would want to separate them out, at least ideally about 3 to 4 hours apart from each other, so that you're not just taking that antibiotic and then taking the probiotic and just killing the probiotic with the antibiotic. So give them a 3 to 4 hour lag time between the two. And so I don't recommend waiting. I recommend taking them at the same time concomitantly. Question from Denise: can a fever or sweating ever be a symptom of being glutened? Yes, it can. Gluten exposure, being glutened, right, can actually emulate a fever. It can emulate an infection. Okay. So the question keeps coming back to that antibiotic / probiotic. There's no danger in taking them at the same time. Like you're not going to disrupt the antibiotic's effect, and you're not going to, if anything, the antibiotic is going to disrupt the probiotic, but what you're doing is you're taking them on the same day, mainly because you don't want to just take an antibiotic for 10 days, let's say it's a course of antibiotics for 10 days, and do nothing for your gut. You want to put as much healthy flora in there as possible, because remember, the number one side effect of taking a prolonged antibiotic is a yeast overgrowth. So by taking that strong probiotic with it, you very much can reduce or minimize your risk of developing a yeast overgrowth. So this question, Angel says, niacinamide, garlic, resveratrol for cholesterol. Brought mine down 50 points, 6 pats to go, and doctor wants me on cholesterol meds. Define 6 pats. That sounds like British to me. So Angel, define 6 pats. But I think the bigger question isn't what you should do to lower your cholesterol. I think the bigger question is what is actually considered to be healthy cholesterol versus unhealthy cholesterol. Remember, most doctors are going to want it under 200. Now, is that the right move? No. Even if you're taking things that naturally bring it down, like red yeast rice, or you could take niacin, you can take high-dose fish oils, and those will all kind of bring it down to a certain extent. The question isn't, let's get it down lower. The question is, why do we want it lower? What is the actual premise of lowering cholesterol? And if you haven't seen some of my information on the cholesterol myth, type that in. Go to glutenfreesociety.org, type in the cholesterol myth, and pull up those videos and that information. Learn more about cholesterol, because you may be thinking, I need to lower my cholesterol, and I'm doing it natural, therefore it's safer and it's better. But in reality, you may not even need to be worried so much about cholesterol. That really is the takeaway. Remember, you lower your cholesterol, you increase your risk for depression, but even greater, neuronal synapses, bile acids, vitamin D, CoQ10, those things become inhibited, those things don't work as well, and now you end up struggling as a result of those consequences. Nancy, if you have a fibroma and you're being faced with certain decisions with medication, the best thing you can do, look, I would encourage any of you who are looking at one of these medical decisions, it's very alarming and it's very concerning to you, is if your traditional conventional doctor is telling you surgery medicine is the solution, understand this. From a fundamental practical perspective, no amount of hormone dysregulation was ever caused as a result of being deficient in surgery or being deficient in a drug, a medication. So the fundamental question is not what you can do to artificially mask or artificially manipulate your hormone. The question is, why is the hormone abnormal in the first place? That's the question that needs to be asked. Now, many of you are struggling because maybe your doctor's not having that conversation with you. This is where I would highly encourage you to work with a functional medicine doctor, because you're going to get more information. If your philosophy is more of a diet, lifestyle, natural, you're going to get more information that matches what you want to do, as opposed to being told you need drugs and surgery. Okay. Going through these questions. Yeah, I like this comment. Linda says, listening to the horrors of others post-hysterectomy changed my mind. Again, this isn't a place where we're judging anybody whether you've had it or you haven't had it, but we just, if you're in that decision and you're facing that, you definitely want to know all your options and get educated. So if chemo popped you into menopause, yes, you could still have pseudomenopause. That is a potential possibility. I've seen women go through that and bounce back from it, but it largely depends on what they're doing to try to bounce back from it. Sometimes these things really need to be dialed in. They really need to be measured. You need therapeutic doses of nutrients to really get to overcome that type of chemo-based damage. So Huda's asking, is cholesterol of 110 too low? As I said, anything under 150 is in my opinion, is too low. Okay, let's see here. Corey says, great video. Do you do any or have any videos on SNPs? I actually used to do a radio show on genetic single nucleotide polymorphisms, Corey. I don't know if you can go find that in the archive. I don't even know if we have that up in the archive, but I've done several radio shows on genetics and the single nucleotide polymorphisms. If not, we can do another one in the future. As a matter of fact, those of you who'd like to see me talk about genetic SNPs or genetics, just go ahead and type in yes please in your box, and if I get 100 people that type that in, then I'll do a show on it and focus in on that for you guys. Okay. Gosh, we got all kinds of questions. A lot of them aren't related. I'm going to try to keep to related questions. If the gallbladder is inflamed, what could be the cause? In my experience, most people, when there's an inflamed gallbladder, it's an overright toxicity, and that can come from a number of different things: eating bad food, eating processed food, being overexposed to chemicals like heavy metals, but also gluten. Gluten is a very, very big trigger for gallbladder inflammation. Okay, this is a good question. Dana says, but aren't you low on hormones if you're premenopause or in menopause? I've had my levels checked by my environmental doctor. Yeah, I mean, there's a natural progression for hormones to drop as you do hit certain age points. Your body doesn't need to, the whole premise of menopause is that your body is actually protecting you by not allowing you to have more children. And so those eggs, remember, women are born with all the eggs they're ever going to have. And you know, those eggs have a shelf life. And so menopause is the body's natural way of reducing the hormone output so a woman won't get pregnant. Because, you know, as we know, the older a woman is above the age of 35, the greater potential there is for birth defects and abnormal birth problems. So again, yeah, there's a natural decline in hormones in women. And so again, some women here's the thing, some women take hormones because it's a quality of life issue. Their quality of life, their hot flashes, their irritability, their severe mood swings, their symptoms are so great and it's disrupting their life to such a great degree that they opt to take bioidentical hormones, or they opt to take, you know, estrogen or progesterone or other hormones as a quality of life choice. Now, as long as you're aware of what the risks can possibly be, you know, and you're making an intelligent choice and you're aware of the risks, that's what we call informed consent. You're being informed of what those potential risks are, and you're saying that, yes, the way that my life is now isn't, it would be better if I weren't having these symptoms, so I opt to accept those risks because the symptoms are so great that I'm not enjoying life. And so that's what some women opt to do. There's nothing wrong in doing that, although if you're on bioidentical hormones and you're trying to bring your levels up to, let's say you're 50 and you're trying to bring your levels up to that of a 30-year-old woman, then you definitely need to be running lab tests periodically that measure your estrogen metabolites. Because if you're not, and you start abnormally metabolizing those estrogens, that's where some of the increased risk for disease comes from. The increased risk for cancer when you are not properly metabolizing that hormone that you're taking, whether it be, you know, cream, whether it be pellets, whether it be oral, whether it be patches. If your body's not properly metabolizing it, breaking it down and secreting it or excreting it, then you can end up with higher levels of certain types of estrogens that can increase your risk for the development of certain types of cancers. That's one of the risks. So if you're doing that, you should be in communication with your prescribing doctor to have those levels monitored. That's just, that to me is just diligence and smart. Okay, so this question is a little different. Nancy's asking, or rather Julie's asking, what level should LDL and HDL be, and where do you get healthy organic cholesterol from? Well, you get healthy cholesterol from eating animal meat. A lot of our cholesterol in the diet, about 25% of our total cholesterol is from our diet. The rest of it is intrinsically produced in the liver and other cells. Every cell in your body has the ability to produce cholesterol. So it's not so much that you need to go seeking eating pure organic cholesterol. You're going to get that from eating healthy animal foods predominantly, or you're going to produce cholesterol intrinsically, naturally, even if you're not eating it, because your liver has the ability to metabolize lipids and form cholesterol as a result of that. So you don't necessarily need to go seek it out per se. But understand that the dietary cholesterol, a lot of doctors will tell you, don't eat any cholesterol in your diet. Don't eat eggs. Don't eat foods with cholesterol like meat, because it'll raise your cholesterol and your cholesterol is already high. And what they're telling you is that anything over 200 is considered high. And that's just, again, this is my opinion, and this is the opinion of, I didn't form my opinion just because I have an opinion. Like, this is the opinion of a lot of the world leading experts in cholesterol. And not every doctor agrees on this. I want you to understand, a lot of doctors will tell you, well, the science is done with cholesterol. We know high cholesterol causes heart disease. That's not true. There's a whole other body of science that says that cholesterol is very, very safe and very, very fine, and that lower than 200 is kind of ridiculous, and that people, what we do know is the old number used to be 250. Now, that number was not biased. It was not as influenced by pharmaceutical industry, so that tends to be what a lot of doctors who are like me will shoot for, as long as it's under that, as long as it's that or less. You know, we seem to be pretty good with that. Now, one of the things you have to understand is people with the highest cholesterol live longer. That's a fact. We know that. People with the highest cholesterol have longer lifespans. Now, to me, that's an argument all by itself. We don't know why. We don't know why that happens, but we know it's true. Higher cholesterol, people have a longer lifespan. We know that cholesterol is important for these things. We also know cholesterol is an antibacterial, it's antiviral, so it helps fight infection. And so sometimes what happens, a person goes to the doctor when they feel bad, they get their cholesterol measured, their cholesterol might be running high because they're sick. And so never, ever, ever use your cholesterol marker when you have a viral or a bacterial infection as the reading for basing whether or not you're going to try or attempt to lower your cholesterol. Let's see here. Lots of yeses. We're going to count those yeses and see if we're going to do a genetic show here. If you don't have a gallbladder anymore, there's some things that you can do if you don't have a gallbladder. So like if you've had a surgical removal, one of the things I recommend that you take is nutritional digestive aid. So digestive enzyme support, because without your gallbladder, it's going to be harder potentially to absorb fat. And one of the things we see 5 to 10 years post gallbladder surgery is we start to see fat soluble vitamin deficiencies really turning up a lot more aggressively. So that's vitamin A, D, E, and K, as well as omega-3 fatty acids. So I recommend a product called Ultra Digest GB for support of digestion if you've had your gallbladder removed. And we can put a link up there to that for you. Okay, let's see here. Can weight gain of more than 35 pounds trigger a loss of hormones or periods? Tracy wants to know. Tracy, typically it's just the opposite. Typically it's, can weight loss, aggressive weight loss, trigger a loss of period? And the answer there is absolutely yes. When women's body fat gets too low, we see this in Olympians, we see this in high-level athletes, where they lose a lot of weight and their body fat's too low, they'll actually lose their cycle, again, because fat is a very important regulator of hormone levels, but generally not the opposite way around. If you've gained 35 pounds, that could be a hormone disruptor depending on why you've gained the weight. If you've gained inflammatory weight, if that inflammation is largely being caused by dietary and lifestyle factors and some of these other things, yes, that can create a hormone disruption. So, absolutely, that can be part of a problem. Are vitamin B injections effective? If you're talking about IV can be very effective for immediate energy, but injections like in the muscle, they're not really, in my experience, they're not really any more effective than oral vitamin B supplementation. Okay. So this is a good question. How can I lower androstenedione? My testosterone, estrogen, progesterone are in normal range. I also have PCOS. Number one way that you can lower your androstenedione is to get your insulin under control. One of the things that elevations in insulin, PCOS, by the way, polycystic ovarian syndrome, is diabetes of the ovaries. That's the way you want to think about it. Don't think of it any differently. It's diabetes of the ovaries. So generally what tends to happen in that scenario is there's an increase in insulin, and that is going to come back over here in that androstenedione, and it's going to potentially elevate it, or it's going to favorably, let me spell this right for you, androstenedione. It's going to potentially lead to more conversion of your sex steroid into androstenedione. It can also elevate your testosterone and cause facial hair growth, dark hair, those kinds of things. So the best number one thing that you can do is to control your insulin. And the easiest way to do that, there's two really simple pieces of advice I can give you. One is get involved in an exercise program immediately. And it doesn't have to be CrossFit or something super aggressive. It just needs to be where you're moving and you're getting exercise on a daily basis. Number two, you need to make sure that you're monitoring your diet intake. Excessive carbohydrate intake is highly linked to PCOS. So you might consider keeping your total carbohydrates, below 30, 40 grams a day, keeping them lower to get your insulin under better control. Also ask your doctor to do a full nutritional workup, because if your zinc is low, your chromium, your vitamin D, if any of those things are low, it's going to impact and affect your blood sugar levels and cause an increase potentially in insulin, leading to hormonal disruption. Remember, insulin elevations can disrupt estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, androstenedione, It's not a good thing. Too much insulin is a very, very bad thing as it relates to hormones. And the biggest thing that causes too much insulin is excessive sugar, excessive carbohydrates in the diet, and sedentary behavior, sedentary activity, or lack of activity rather. This question coming in, person who's been disabled for osteoarthritis and been on NSAIDs for years. Recommendations for alternative to non-steroidals. You know, one of the best things that you can do is just go to a functional medicine doctor and get a complete workup, because there could be a lot of different things that might have an impact there. One of the things that can impact really aggressively is low levels of omega-3 fatty acids. As a matter of fact, some research studies show that 4 to 6 grams of concentrated omega-3, concentrated EPA and DHA can be equally as effective as ibuprofen. So that may be where you want to start, is just with a strong dose of omega-3. Okay. Can stress throw hormonal balance off? Yeah, it can. Partly because stress causes an increase in insulin, but stress also causes an increase in another hormone called cortisol. And if we're talking about chronic stress, long-term stress elevates cortisol, and an elevation in cortisol leads to a suppression of immune function. It leads to bone loss, it leads to muscle atrophy and weakness, which leads to shortening of muscles, which leads to inability to basically exercise. And that spirals, it spins, it keeps you in that state. Well, that cortisol also, excessive cortisol like that, will disrupt your brain's capacity to produce different adrenal hormones. So it's going to really, really disrupt, it's going to create a cascade of disruption with your hormones. So yes, to answer your question, chronic stress can very, very much impact your hormone levels. This question coming in about elimination diet versus blood tests to check for sensitivity. If you're talking about gluten sensitivity, the only way to do it, the only way to check for it with any great degree of accuracy is genetics. We can put a link up for you to read more about that. If you're talking about other foods, hands down, you should always try an elimination diet if you don't have a doctor you're working with who can run these types of tests. Elimination diet is self-feedback, right? You're cutting certain things out and then bringing them back in and seeing how you feel after you've cut them out and brought them back in. But a problem with elimination diets is they'll help you identify certain things. But if you're still hitting a plateau and you're still struggling in your health, then the right blood test can make a huge difference. A huge difference. If you want to see how big of a difference it can make, go check out, I have a video on our YouTube channel. It should be under gluten-free success stories, but there's a gentleman there, his name is Greg, and his story is a perfect example where this gentleman went to 60 different dermatologists. Then he went to the ER because he had his colon was perforated as a result of food he was eating that he didn't know was creating those problems. And he had already gone and changed his diet. He had already hit that plateau point. He came to me to get delineation and clarity on what things he should absolutely be avoiding versus not. And so testing can give that clarity for many people. I'm a big believer in testing without guessing. So like test, don't guess. But if you're on your own and you're not working with the doctor, yeah, do an elimination diet first. It's common sense that you want to take away things that your body obviously is giving you symptoms over. So definitely you can do one. But if you're hitting that plateau, get help. Okay. Oh, I like this. Shushi Mushi is asking, Dr. Osborne, a positive ANA test can be caused because of gluten sensitivity, or do I have to check other possibilities? My doctor couldn't detect the problem. Go back to genetic testing for gluten sensitivity. Yes, gluten sensitivity can cause positive ANA. That's ANA is anti-nuclear antibodies. It's a test that a lot of rheumatologists and other doctors will run to try to detect to see whether or not you have autoimmune disease. Okay. I think we got that one answered already. We answered it for somebody else already. So, okay, another one. Can heavy metal toxicity affect your hormones? Of course it can. Here's one way in which heavy metal toxicity can impact hormones. Remember I said earlier that magnesium is critical for the proper metabolism of estrogen. Well, let's use, for example, lead toxicity. The reason I use lead is because it's probably one of the most common heavy metal toxicities today in people above the age of 45. And one of the reasons why, if you're above 40, if you're 45 or older, you grew up in what we call the lead age. You were young enough to remember leaded gasoline. There was lead in the gasoline. There was lead in paint. There was lead in children's toys. Many of the pipes were soldered with lead. So lead was very, very prevalent in our environments. And so many of you have accumulated lead from that age on, and you bioaccumulated it. Well, lead displaces magnesium and calcium. So lead interferes with magnesium and calcium. And both of these are important for hormone regulation. Magnesium for the actual metabolism of different hormones, but calcium does a different job as it relates to hormones. Let's see if we got enough room to draw here. We'll find a place. So if this is your cell, and this is the cell nucleus, and this is the DNA inside the cell. And this, on the surface of the cell, is a hormone receptor. So this is where your hormone will attach. And so here's the way this kind of works, generically speaking. That hormone comes in here, whether it's estrogen, progesterone, whatever that hormone is. It comes in here, it attaches to the hormone receptor, and it sends a message through the cell so that that message is supposed to get to your DNA, and it's supposed to turn on certain genes to do certain things, okay? Depending on the hormone, depending on what we're trying to accomplish. Well, calcium sits inside your cells to deliver that message. Calcium is like a messenger boy of hormones. There's actually a name for this in science. It's called a secondary messenger, meaning that calcium receives the message of the hormone and then delivers that message to the DNA, and then the DNA turns on certain genes because that's what the hormone is asking it to do. So calcium plays a role as a regulatory electrolyte in the delivery of the message of that hormone to your genes so that it can be activated. And if you have a lead toxicity, remember that lead displaces calcium. It competes with calcium. So wherever calcium goes, wherever calcium plays, lead can compete with those functions, and this is one of those functions it can compete with. So yes, heavy metal toxicity can definitely affect hormones. Okay. We're right up at the hour here, and there's no way I can answer all these questions. So what we'll do, if you've got a topic idea and you'd really, really love to hear me talk about that topic idea, we're open to that. We really want to help serve you. We want to do our best to get your questions answered. Please do me a favor. Send those topic ideas over. You can post it in the feed, but if you send it over to glutenology@gmail.com, it's glutenology@gmail.com, then we will classify those, and we'll see what our demands are and what most of you are wanting, and we'll start brainstorming those shows for you and create that. So if you've got show ideas that you'd like to see me cover, just send me an email, and we'll do our best to get those covered shortly. Remember that we want you to share this information with somebody who you think it might be helpful for. That's part of our goal, is to save 100 million. You could hashtag save 100 million lives, and that would be great. But we want you to share this information. If you haven't already, go over to glutenfreesociety.org and sign up for our gluten-free survival kit. If you haven't already read No Grain, No Pain, make sure you get your copy. It's our nutrition guide for the show. So those of you who haven't read it, that are on the show, and your question marks are popping into your head when I'm talking about true gluten-free versus traditional gluten-free and other terms that you're going to hear me use, that book is really your guideline to a safety net for your diet. So make sure you get your copy. We will be back next Monday night, same time, 6 p.m. Central Standard Time. Love for you to join us again. Look for your email. If you don't subscribe, that's how we hit reminders. Also, you can hit that bell down there on the bottom of the screen, and you'll get a reminder from us. So make sure you do that if you want to tune in on a weekly basis. Until next week, hope you have a fantastic Tuesday through Sunday, and we will see you for Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain next Monday night.